Hey there, students. I just wanted to give you an introduction to My Antonia. My Antonia, my copy looks different than yours, but this is the book we're starting this week. Every one of you should have this. If you don't, you really need to tell me now because you were supposed to tell me earlier. So I need to know. But My Antonia by Willa Cather is a book about Nebraska and about the settling of the Midwest with immigrants. So we have a story written by a woman who's got a very interesting life for herself in the late 1800s. She's born in 1873, but she wrote My Antonia in 1918. And when she writes My Antonia, she writes it what most people have made the conclusion, she has never really corrected anyone, is based on what she experienced growing up in Nebraska. Now, she was very forward thinking for her time. Willa Cather went to the University of Nebraska, which was rare for women to be university trained. She set her book as if she were um, uh, going through her childhood, like I said, but she writes it from an interesting perspective. She has her main character as a man, and the man is recalling his friend Antonia. And Antonia is an immigrant from Russia, somewhere around Russia, Eastern Europe. And sorry, rusty on the details. She is intriguing to the main character. So I don't know that we can directly name Willa Cather as a character in the book, but we do see her perspective of what she saw and experienced and believed during her time growing up in Nebraska. So this is considered a modernist piece. It was published in 1918, so it is right after the Red Badge of Courage by a couple decades. It's still in the realm of realism, where Red Badge of Courage wrote about the realism of war. This is about the realism of settling of the West, of prejudices toward not just immigrants, but immigrants from different backgrounds. So even though most were immigrants, it wasn't directly a prejudice just against color, but it was against different religious backgrounds or those that couldn't speak the language. So often when immigrants settled, they would settle where there was someone that spoke the language. Well, you'll see the difficulties that happen for the Shimerda family, which is Antonia's family, in that they don't speak the language and there's only one man to trust with telling them what anyone is saying, and how that plays out is not exactly ethical. So you'll see what that looks like. But this is considered a modernist piece. If you'll glance through it, you'll notice it's organized into books. So the first book is about 69 pages, and that's the book about the Shimerdas. And then we'll look into the Hired Girls, which is not exactly what you're thinking. It is a way for families to make money when the farms are not making much money. So, and then specific ones that go back and forth. So these are considered episodes. The reason it's called a modernist piece is because it is episodic. It's not necessarily following a smooth timeline, chronologically speaking, although most of it moves in a forward motion. It does skip gaps of time, and so that's why it's episodic. Willa Cather often fought the gender barriers of the time. Women were often portrayed during this time period as weak and meek and needing a man who is strong, and that's not Miss Cather's way of seeing things. She has very strong characters for women, and they're usually athletic and very active, and the men are the ones are sometimes portrayed as weak and passive. Willa Cather herself used to ask to be called William when she was at the university, and she would wear men's clothing. Now, before you read anything modernist into that, she just may have thought that that was a better way to fit in. There has never been anything written that tells us there was any gender choices going on there, just that she would dress that way and would portray herself that way. But it doesn't mean we need to draw any conclusions that we would with modern people and modern viewpoints of that. It may have just been her way of being able to fit in a man's world on a university campus. So the picture of the West is through the eyes of women, of immigrants, even though her main character is a man. It talks about the hardships of the West, and there are harsh topics in here. I do need to warn you, there are topics where we will see suicide, where we will see the harsh realities of prejudice. So it's to me, it's given in very much a way that is very dry. It's kind of like he committed suicide and there's that. And that's that realism aspect. We're not shown the grieving in the same way we would now with it, so it's not very emotive. Even though we should feel the emotion over it, it doesn't do what we would do with a piece today where it pulls at the heartstrings. It's more that it just says that it happens and they moved on, which very much fits the times of what's happening in the West. As you're settling into the West and dealing with the toils and hardships of farming and of eking out a living in brand new towns that are just sprouting up, there's kind of a necessity to moving on and not sticking within one's grief over something that happens, because you do have to still survive where you are. If you will look at there's a page in here that says, so it says there's a dedication page to two people named Carrie and Irene. But then after the contents, there's a page that says Optima Dies Prima Fugit, and it's a quote from Virgil. And that quote means the best days are the first to flee. So this is really a memoir of Willa Cather's childhood. It is the third book in a trilogy, and the most famous one of that trilogy is O Pioneers, and then the second one was Song of the Lark, and then it concluded with My Antonia. But again, the entire three-piece series is episodic, so it kind of feels a bit divided. But we will try to get through all 5 books of this one by the end of the year, which means about 8 pages a day. So your reading tonight begins with the introduction. The introduction is not separate. The introduction is actually kind of chapter 1 of book 1, but it's the introduction, and then we're given the 5 books, and those books are divided by chapters. But we're going to try to stick to about 8 pages a night so that we can make reading as spread out as we can. So sometimes we'll be ending 2 pages before a chapter ends, and you always have the ability to read those 2 pages ahead of time should you choose to do so. Okay, what else am I going to try to tell you today? These first few pages, I need you to notice the speaker in the introduction is not the same speaker as in book 1 or even the rest of the books, but you need to figure out who that speaker is. So I don't know that we're given a direct person's name by the end of the book. Maybe we do, maybe we don't, but it's definitely not the same person. So you need to notice the differences between the narrator in the introduction, the first person narrator, and then the first person narrator in book 1, the Shimerdas, because it's different. So keep your eye open for that. You are annotating each day, and you will have an annotation check every day. So you need to stay on top of your reading. That is your number 1 goal. Your number 2, your other goals for this next 5 weeks are the poetry memorization and a bit on the grammar. And then we are starting to write our essay, our final essay. So look for separate videos on those things. So I hope you're interested in reading. I think this is a beautifully written book. The descriptions of the Midwest remind me of growing up in farm country in Minnesota before I moved to Oklahoma, and just the wide open fields and the description of the toil of the land and the smells is very familiar to me, even the harsh winters. So I hope you enjoy this view, and maybe it'll help you escape a little bit from your Corona box. Okay? All right. I hope you guys have a great day.